That's why I like to lock myself in a room when I write, because it sounds like I'm talking to myself. It is a Dutch name. Yes, I'm American. I'm American-born Chinese. But I married a Dutchman. He was born in Dordrecht, and his first name is Jaap. So it's a very typically Dutch name. And when I met him, he was still a Dutch citizen. But he became an American citizen after our children were born. I'm basically a shy person. I like to stay in my house all day. I'm very happy sitting at my desk making things up. But on the side, I love to garden, I love to cook, I love to travel, and I'm a mom and a grandmother. I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was 7 years old. So way before I became a doctor. But my father didn't think that writing was a career that would allow me to support myself. So he suggested I become a medical doctor. I practiced medicine for about 5 years, and then went home on maternity leave when I wrote my first book. And after I ended up selling a book, I thought, I'm going to go back to my first love, which was always to be a storyteller. All over the place. I like to read newspapers, so some of them are from true crime, which is kind of a scary idea. Some of them come because of long-term interest. I was an anthropology major in college, so I was always interested in Egyptology, and that ended up being a book that was about Egyptian mummies. I pay attention to odd things I read in the newspaper. There was a disaster that happened in Utah many years ago, and that became a story called Ice Cold. So I think that stories are all around us. What you do with them is what makes a storyteller. No, I think I write the books that I want to read. So I'm satisfying, let's say, 1 million readers just like me, where I want to know what happens to the woman in the body bag. I want to know why she ends up there. So I start off really by asking a question I think everybody is interested in: what happens next? And every book has its own subject matter. Every book has its own, the reason for it to be born. For instance, this book that I just wrote, The Shape of Night, my interest was what happens when a woman has a choice between a lover who is not real but is perfect, and a lover who is real but is not perfect. So a real man versus a possibly imaginary man who can satisfy her better. And I think a lot of women have this choice as we get, as we start to find spouses. Do we go for the stable, solid man who will be a good husband and a good father, or do we go for the dangerous one? And that's a question that's universal. Well, the Brody's Watch is, it's an example of a lot of the buildings that are where I live in the state of Maine. And some of the biggest homes in any of these little villages are always sea captains' houses. Now they're over 100 years old, and now a lot of them are bed and breakfasts. But it's based on a lot of homes I've seen on the coast of Maine. Now, is the ghost real? And that's a question that everybody wants to know. And I know the answer myself, but I think it's up to every reader to decide for themselves. It's a book that you can interpret many different ways, and I want everybody to have the freedom to interpret it the way they feel like they should. Yes. Yeah, I think it's a book because it's a very sensuous book, and it should be told verbally. You should be able to hear the sounds and hear what the woman is thinking, because so much of it is told in a woman's voice. And there's also a lot of sensual details, not just what goes on between Ava and the captain in her bedroom, but also what happens in the kitchen, the cooking. Cooking uses all your senses, from taste to smell to sound. So I think it all blends together in almost a dreamlike sequence. That's where hearing it told to you may be more effective. So, dialogue. Okay, now I read my dialogue out loud to myself, and that's why I like to lock myself in a room when I write, because it sounds like I'm talking to myself. But I do think it's really important for authors to, just to read the dialogue aloud, to see, would people say this naturally? Does it seem natural? Does it feel natural? Really, for me, audiobooks are primarily about fiction. If it's nonfiction, very often, if it's like a textbook, I want the text. I want to be able to flip back and forth to see if I really remembered what I just read. But because fiction tends to be, it just goes forward. It goes forward. You don't need to flip back to find out some detail you'd forgotten. So I listen to it for fiction. I listen to it sometimes when I have a long drive. And in the United States, yeah, we do have some long drives.